A young man trudges through a snow-covered park after a long late shift, the freezing wind cutting to the bone. Suddenly he spots an electric wheelchair stuck in the snow, an elderly woman shivering helplessly in the icy night. Without hesitation, he helps her home and repairs her wheelchair. The next day, a strange email appears, one that will change his life forever. Before we begin this story, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The wind cut through Denver like a blade that December evening, the kind of cold that found every gap in your coat and reminded you winter wasn't playing games. Ethan Miller pulled his jacket tighter as he stepped off the bus at the corner of Colfax and Sherman, his breath forming small clouds in the frozen air. At 22, he looked older than his years, not in his face, which still held the softness of youth, but in his eyes. They carried the weight of someone who'd learned early that life didn't hand out second chances just because you asked nicely. His backpack, worn at the seams and patched with duct tape, pressed against his shoulders. Inside were textbooks for his mechanical engineering courses at Colorado Tech University, a half-eaten sandwich from lunch, and a small toolkit he never left home without. The toolkit had been his mother's gift on his 16th birthday, back when she was still alive, back when the future seemed like something bright instead of something you had to fight for every single day. Ethan walked 3 blocks to the small apartment he shared with his father. The building was old, the kind that groaned in the wind, and had radiators that clanked all night but never quite got warm enough. But it was home, and after everything they'd been through, having a roof over their heads felt like a miracle he didn't take for granted. He pushed open the door to find his father exactly where he'd left him that morning, in his wheelchair by the window, looking out at the street below. Jack Miller had been a mechanic once, the kind who could diagnose an engine problem just by listening to it idle. He'd been strong, capable, the man who taught Ethan that if something was broken you didn't throw it away, you figured out how to fix it. That was before the accident at the auto shop 2 years ago. A lift had failed, and Jack had been underneath a truck when it came down. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive. Ethan wasn't sure his father felt lucky. The spinal injury had left him paralyzed from the waist down, trapped in a body that no longer answered when he asked it to move. "Hey Dad," Ethan said, setting down his backpack and moving to check the thermostat. 64 degrees. He turned it up 2 notches, knowing they'd pay for it on next month's electric bill, but unable to stand the thought of his father sitting in the cold all day. "How was school?" Jack's voice was rough, weathered by years of cigarettes he'd quit after the accident, and a pride he'd swallowed when he had to rely on his son for everything. "Same as always," Ethan replied, which was partly true. The classes were challenging but manageable. It was everything else that exhausted him. The late nights working delivery shifts, the early mornings fixing bikes and small engines at old Tom's garage for cash under the table, the constant calculation of whether they could afford groceries this week, or if they'd have to stretch last week's beans and rice a little further. Ethan had been accepted to Colorado Tech on a partial scholarship, a miracle in itself. But partial didn't cover rent, food, medical supplies or the modifications they'd needed to make the apartment wheelchair accessible, so he worked. And when he wasn't working, he was studying. And when he wasn't studying, he was taking care of his father, helping him bathe, cooking meals, doing physical therapy exercises the insurance no longer covered. He dropped out for a semester after the accident, planning to return when things stabilized. But Jack had refused to let him quit entirely. "Your mama didn't raise you to give up on your dreams because of me," he'd said, his jaw set in that stubborn way that meant there was no point arguing. So Ethan had gone back, taking reduced course loads and working himself to exhaustion to make it all fit together. "You eat today?" Ethan asked, opening the refrigerator. 3 eggs, half a loaf of bread, some leftover chicken from 2 days ago. "I'm not hungry," Jack said, which meant he'd eaten the last of the cereal for breakfast and didn't want Ethan to worry about dinner. Ethan didn't argue. He cracked the eggs into a pan, toasted the bread, divided everything in half. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from spending so much time together that words become optional. After dinner, Ethan washed the dishes, helped his father get ready for bed, and then sat at the small kitchen table with his textbooks spread before him. But his mind wasn't on thermodynamics or materials science, it was on the wheelchair tucked in the corner, Jack's lifeline and prison all at once. The chair was old, second-hand when they'd gotten it, and it showed. The left wheel caught sometimes, the seat cushion had lost most of its padding, and the frame creaked ominously whenever Jack transferred into it. Ethan had been sketching designs in the margins of his notebooks for months now. Lighter frames using aerospace alloys, better suspension systems, motors efficient enough to last all day without draining the battery. In his mind he could see it, a wheelchair that didn't feel like a punishment, that moved smooth and quiet, that gave its user freedom instead of just mobility. Someday, he whispered to himself, pencil moving across the page, I'll build a chair that moves like freedom. It was almost midnight when he heard the alert on his phone, a delivery request from the restaurant where he worked part-time. The order was going to the north end of town, which meant good tip potential. They needed the money. He pulled on his jacket, grabbed his keys and headed out into the cold. The delivery took longer than expected, traffic was slow because of black ice, and by the time he was heading back, snow had started falling. Not the gentle, picturesque kind, but heavy wet flakes that stuck to everything and turned the streets into treacherous skating rinks. He was cutting through Cheeseman Park, taking a shortcut back to his apartment, when he saw her. At first, he thought it was just a shadow, a dark shape against the white landscape. But as he got closer, he realized it was a person, an elderly woman in an electric wheelchair, motionless in the middle of the path. Snow had accumulated on her shoulders and lap, and even from a distance, Ethan could see she was shaking. He didn't think. He just acted, the same way he'd been acting his whole life when he saw something broken that needed fixing. Ma'am, he jogged over, his shoes crunching in the fresh snow. Ma'am, are you okay? She looked up at him with eyes that held both relief and embarrassment. She was in her 70s, Ethan guessed, with white hair tucked under a knitted cap and a wool coat that was expensive but not designed for sitting motionless in a snowstorm. My chair stopped working, she said, her voice thin and shaky. I was heading home from my daughter's house, taking the path through the park like I always do, and it just died. The display won't even turn on. Ethan knelt beside the wheelchair, already running through possibilities in his mind. How long have you been out here? I don't know, maybe 20 minutes. I tried calling my daughter but my phone died. I'm so cold. 20 minutes in this weather could mean hypothermia. The old woman's lips were pale, her breath shallow, trembling in the cold. Ma'am, we need to get you out of here, Ethan said, already taking off his jacket and wrapping it gently around her shoulders. He looked down the empty snow-drowned path, then silenced the delivery alert buzzing on his phone. The order could wait, saving her couldn't. I live a couple blocks away, he said. We'll get you warm first, then I'll take a look at your chair. She nodded weakly, too cold to speak. Ethan gripped the wheelchair handles and began to push. The wheels snagged and dragged through the snow, but he didn't slow down. The wind cut across his face, freezing his breath in midair, yet he kept going, one step at a time, until they reached his small apartment. Inside, warmth filled the space like a wave. Ethan parked the chair near the radiator and grabbed a blanket, wrapping it around her. Thank you, she murmured, voice faint but steady. I didn't think anyone would stop. Ethan gave a small smile. My mom used to say, if something's broken you fix it, that includes people. For a long moment, she sat quietly, staring at the window where snowflakes still pressed against the glass. Then softly, she said, I shouldn't have been out there alone. Ethan looked up from where he was kneeling beside the wheelchair. I was visiting my husband, she continued. He passed away 3 winters ago. We used to walk that path together every evening, no matter how cold it was. It sounds silly, but sometimes I go there just to feel close to him again. Her eyes glistened. I thought I could make it home before the storm got worse. I was wrong. Ethan's expression softened. It's not silly, he said quietly. It's human, she smiled weakly. You're kind, young man, kinder than most. Then glancing down at her phone, she sighed. And now of course my phone's dead. Would you mind if I borrowed a charger? Of course not, Ethan said, finding one in the drawer. Here. Thank you. She plugged it in, waiting as the screen flickered to life. While it charged, Ethan knelt beside her wheelchair, inspecting the damage. Looks like moisture got into the control module. I can fix it, it'll just take a few minutes. He opened the casing carefully, brushing away ice and melted snow. His fingers were raw from the cold, but he worked with patient precision. The woman watched him, her eyes soft but curious. "You've done this before?" "Yeah," Ethan said, not looking up. "My dad's in a wheelchair, his breaks down all the time. You learn fast when someone you love depends on it." Something in her face changed, a mix of empathy and admiration. After a few minutes, the display blinked back to life. "There," Ethan said, exhaling. "Should be good now." She tested the joystick. The chair moved smoothly forward, the soft hum of the motor filling the silence. Her eyes filled with relief. "You really saved me," she whispered. Ethan smiled. "Just lucky I came by when I did." Her phone buzzed. She picked it up and made a call. "Robert, it's me. Yes, I'm fine. I'm at." She glanced at Ethan. He gave his address, trying not to sound embarrassed as she repeated it. When she hung up, she turned back to him. "What's your name?" "Ethan," he said. "Ethan Miller." "I'm Margaret," she replied softly. "Margaret Caldwell." "Thank you, Ethan Miller. I promise I won't forget this." 20 minutes later, a sleek black sedan pulled up outside. A man in a dark coat helped her into the car. Before leaving, Margaret turned back toward Ethan, her expression unreadable but warm. "If you ever need anything," she said, "call me." Ethan nodded politely. "Just glad you're safe, ma'am." He watched the car disappear into the snow until it became one with the storm. Then he went back inside, unaware that the woman he just helped wasn't just a stranger in trouble, but one of the most powerful people in the city, and that this single act of compassion would change his life forever. She'd met plenty of people in her 73 years. Business partners who smiled while plotting to undercut her, charity organizers who only cared about her money, family members who visited because they felt obligated. But genuine kindness, the kind that expected nothing, that gave freely even at personal cost, that was rare enough to be remarkable. By 8 the next morning, her assistant Robert had compiled a file. Ethan Miller, 22 years old, senior at Colorado Tech University, studying mechanical engineering. GPA of 3.7, which was impressive considering he was carrying a reduced course load and working multiple jobs. His mother, Sarah Miller, had died of cancer when Ethan was 16. His father, Jack Miller, had been paralyzed in a workplace accident 2 years ago. The financial picture was stark. Ethan worked deliveries for a restaurant, did repair work at a garage, and occasionally picked up odd jobs through online platforms. He'd been late on rent twice in the past year. He had $14,000 in student loan debt and no savings. The apartment he shared with his father was in a building that had been cited for code violations 3 times. Margaret read through the file twice, then closed it and stared out the window at the Denver skyline. She thought about her own son, who ran the European division of Caldwell Mobility and couldn't be bothered to visit more than twice a year. She thought about her granddaughter, who was studying art history at Yale and had once told Margaret that business was morally bankrupt. She thought about Ethan Miller giving her his jacket in a snowstorm. "Robert," she said, into the phone, "clear my afternoon schedule. I'm going to visit Colorado Tech." 3 hours later, Margaret stood in the hallway of the mechanical engineering building, feeling oddly nervous. She'd given presentations to boards of directors, negotiated with hostile competitors, testified before Congress. But approaching a 22-year-old college student to thank him for an act of kindness felt strangely vulnerable. She found him in one of the practical labs, bent over a disassembled motor, his hair falling into his eyes. He was explaining something to another student, his hands moving expressively as he pointed to different components. Even from a distance, she could see the passion in his movements, the way he lit up when talking about how things worked. Margaret waited until the other student left, then knocked on the doorframe. Ethan looked up, and his expression went from curious to shocked in the space of a heartbeat. "Mrs. Caldwell. You remembered," Margaret said, stepping into the lab. "I wasn't sure you would." "Of course I remembered. Are you okay? Did the chair break down again?" There it was. His first thought was for her well-being, not curiosity about why she was there. Margaret found herself smiling. "The chair is fine thanks to you. I came here to properly thank you, and to make you an offer." Ethan blinked. "An offer?" Margaret moved closer to the workbench. You know what I do, Ethan. I run Caldwell Mobility. We design and manufacture mobility devices, wheelchairs, scooters, prosthetics. We're one of the largest companies in the field. She watched his face as understanding dawned. Last night, when you fixed my wheelchair, you didn't just help me. You showed me something I'd forgotten. You understood that chair, not just mechanically, but what it meant to the person using it. You knew what failure felt like from the inside. Margaret paused. I looked into your background. I know about your father, about how you've been taking care of him, and I realized something. You understand what my engineers don't. You've lived with someone who depends on a wheelchair. You've seen the failures, the frustrations, the little indignities. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. I want you to work for us. Technical intern, $25 an hour, health insurance that covers dependents. You'd help our design teams understand what real users actually need. Ethan stared at the card in her outstretched hand. Mrs. Caldwell, I appreciate this, but I can't accept charity. This isn't charity. Margaret interrupted firmly. This is me being selfish. I built this company to help people, but somewhere along the way, we forgot to ask the people we're helping what they actually need. You can remind us. That's worth far more than $25 an hour. She set the card on the workbench. Come visit the company tomorrow, see what we do, talk to the team, then decide. Margaret moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Ethan. Last night, you told me you'd fixed enough things. But maybe what needs fixing isn't just machines. Maybe it's how we think about the people who use them. The next morning, Ethan stood outside the Caldwell Mobility headquarters building, trying to steady his breathing. The structure was all glass and steel, soaring 20 stories above downtown Denver. People in sharp suits streamed through the revolving doors, all of them looking like they belonged in a way Ethan definitely didn't. He'd worn his best clothes, a button-down shirt he'd ironed that morning, and khakis that were clean but worn. His boots showed their age, but he was here, and that had to count for something. Ethan Miller, he turned to find a man in his 30s approaching. I'm Robert Chen, Mrs. Caldwell's executive assistant. She asked me to give you a tour. Robert led him through a lobby that looked more like an art museum, then up to the 8th floor, the design and engineering wing. Engineers clustered around computer screens. Technicians tested prototypes in what looked like an indoor obstacle course. One entire wall was covered with patents and design awards. It was impressive. It was overwhelming, and Ethan felt distinctly out of place. This is our latest model, Robert said, stopping beside a wheelchair that looked futuristic. The Velocity Pro, carbon fiber frame. Adaptive suspension, AI-assisted navigation. Retails for $42,000. Ethan knelt beside the chair, examining it carefully. It was beautiful, undeniably. Lightweight and elegant, but as he looked closer, he noticed things. The armrests were positioned at an angle that would cause shoulder strain after a few hours. The joystick was centered for aesthetic symmetry, rather than ergonomic comfort. The seat angle prioritized engineering elegance over practical usability. It's incredible, he said carefully. The engineering is amazing, but what? Robert prompted. Ethan hesitated. He was a guest here, a college kid with no credentials. But he thought about his father, about watching Jack struggle daily with equipment that looked impressive but failed to consider the human using it. It doesn't feel like it was designed for someone who has to live in it, Ethan said quietly. It feels like it was designed to win awards. The armrests would cause problems after a few hours. The controls are positioned for symmetry, not comfort. And the seat angle makes it harder to interact with the world at standing height. The silence felt heavy. Ethan immediately regretted speaking. You should have said that. A voice came from behind him. Margaret stood in the doorway. Because you're absolutely right. She walked over to the wheelchair. We designed this chair to impress doctors and insurance companies. We forgot to design it for the people who have to use it every single day. She turned to face Ethan. That's exactly why I need you here. Margaret led him to a conference room. I have a project for you. Our standard manual wheelchairs haven't been redesigned in 12 years. They're functional but expensive, $3,000 for basic models. I want you to design something better, lighter, more comfortable, more durable, and I want you to do it for under $2,000 retail." Ethan stared at her. "That's you're serious?" "Completely serious. You have 3 months, use whatever resources you need." "And Ethan?" She smiled. "Don't be polite, be honest, build something you'd want your father to use." After Margaret left, Ethan sat alone, processing what had just happened. A real project, a real opportunity. A chance to actually build the designs he'd been sketching in margins for months. He thought about his father waiting at home, about the bills and the exhaustion, and the constant struggle, about the dream he'd carefully packed away, because survival took priority over ambition. Maybe, just maybe, he could dream again. Monday morning, Ethan arrived at Caldwell Mobility an hour early, not wanting to make a bad impression. Robert met him in the lobby and issued him a badge, design consultant. It felt official, it felt terrifying. The engineering floor was already bustling when they arrived. Robert led him to a desk in the corner, not isolated, but not quite integrated either. "Mrs. Caldwell will meet with you at 10. Robert said. "Until then familiarize yourself with the space." Then he was gone, and Ethan was alone at his desk, surrounded by engineers who belonged here in ways he didn't. He logged into his computer and started researching, absorbing everything he could about Caldwell's product line. He was so focused, he didn't notice the man approaching until a shadow fell across his desk. "You're the new guy." Ethan looked up to find a man in his 40s, arms crossed. His badge identified him as Brian Fletcher, senior design engineer. "Ethan Miller," Ethan said, standing and extending his hand. Brian shook it briefly. "Design consultant, interesting title for someone still in college." "I'm finishing my degree in mechanical engineering." Ethan offered. "Colorado Tech, right? Good school, not MIT or Stanford, but solid." Brian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "So what's your specialty?" "I've been working more on the practical side. User experience, modifications." "User experience, that's usually marketing's department." Brian glanced around. "Look, I don't know what you did to impress Margaret, but this is a professional engineering firm. We have standards, processes, people with PhDs and decades of experience. Whatever charity case situation brought you here, when it comes to actual design work, you'll need to defer to people who know what they're doing." The words landed like punches. Ethan felt his face flush. "I understand." "Good." Brian walked away, leaving Ethan alone with the clear message, "You don't belong here." Around him, the office continued its normal rhythm, but Ethan was certain people had heard. He caught a few glances, some sympathetic, some amused. He took a breath and turned back to his computer. He didn't have time to worry about office politics. He had work to do. The weeks that followed were grueling. Classes in the morning, work in the afternoon and evening. Ethan barely slept. He spent hours in the materials lab, testing alloys and foams. He made prototype modifications, sketching and building and testing. Most of the engineering team ignored him. A few were actively hostile. But some people helped. Lisa Chen, a junior engineer, showed him the CAD software. Tom Rodriguez, a veteran technician, taught him manufacturing tricks. And through it all, Margaret checked in regularly, not hovering, just making sure he had what he needed. "Trust the process," she'd say. "And trust yourself." 6 weeks in, Ethan had his first complete prototype. It was rough, the welds weren't pretty, the finish was basic, but it was light, functional, and the materials cost came in under $1,200. He was in the lab late one evening, when Brian appeared. "Let me see it," Brian said. Ethan showed him the prototype. Brian examined it carefully, checking every joint and weld. "The welds are amateur," Brian said finally. "The finish is terrible, the tolerances are wrong." "It's a first prototype," Ethan replied. "I know it needs refinement, it needs to be completely redesigned by someone who knows what they're doing." Brian straightened. "You're going to present this to the board and make the whole department look bad. Margaret's already telling people about her revolutionary affordable wheelchair. They'll laugh us out of the room." Brian left, and Ethan stood alone, looking at his prototype. Suddenly it looked different, not promising, but pathetic. His phone buzzed. His father, how's the project going? Ethan looked at the wheelchair again. Rough, yes, amateur, absolutely, but also lighter than anything currently available, more comfortable, and significantly cheaper. He texted back, getting there. Be home late. Then he picked up his tools and got back to work. Brian might be right about the refinement needed, but he was wrong that the project should be abandoned. It just needed someone who believed in it. And right now, that someone had to be Ethan. 2 months into the project, Margaret called a design review meeting. It's time to show the team what you've been working on, she'd said. Now Ethan stood in a conference room, packed with 20 people, senior engineers, executives, board members, and Brian Fletcher, looking almost eager. Everyone, this is Ethan Miller, Margaret said. For the past 2 months he's been working on a redesign of our Atlas manual wheelchair with the goal of significantly reducing cost while maintaining or improving functionality. Ethan, the floor is yours. Ethan's hands were shaking, but he thought about why he'd started this project. Not for the board, not for his career, for people like his father. Thank you all for being here, he began. When Mrs. Caldwell gave me this project, she asked me to design something for people who actually need it. Not the luxury market, but regular people who depend on insurance coverage, who have to make every dollar count. He gestured to his prototype. This is the Freedom Series. The frame is recycled aluminum alloy, heat-treated and reinforced at stress points. The wheels use standard bearings with custom housings. The seat is memory foam with removable washable covers. He demonstrated the features: adjustable armrests, stable footrests, ergonomic positioning. The current Atlas weighs 32 pounds and retails for $3,200. This weighs 23 pounds and should retail for under $2,000. He paused, looking around the room. But the real difference isn't specifications. It's design philosophy. Every choice started with one question: would this work for my father? Would this make his life easier? Would this give him more dignity? The applause was polite but non-committal. Then Brian stood. With all due respect to Ethan's effort, I have serious concerns. Caldwell Mobility is a premium brand. We've spent decades building a reputation for excellence. And now we're considering a wheelchair made from recycled aluminum. He walked over to examine the prototype. The welds are adequate at best. The finish wouldn't pass our quality standards. And the design philosophy is asking us to become a budget brand, to compete on price instead of quality. Brian turned to face the room. We're a luxury brand, not a scrapyard project. This is what you buy when you can't afford a real Caldwell chair. Several people nodded. Ethan felt his face burning. I understand Mrs. Caldwell's compassion, Brian continued. But we have shareholders to consider, brand reputation to maintain. Dropping prices by 40% isn't compassion, it's bad business. This isn't college. This is a professional engineering firm with standards that exist for a reason. The room erupted in conversation. Ethan was about to sit down when Margaret's voice cut through the noise. Brian makes points about business considerations, she said calmly. But I think we need to discuss what business we're actually in. She walked over to Ethan's prototype. When my husband and I started this company 47 years ago, we started because Tom's brother came home from Vietnam with a wheelchair that fell apart in 6 months. We were angry. We believed people deserve better. Somewhere along the way we forgot that. Margaret looked around the room. Last year we made $430 million. We have the resources to do better. We have the responsibility to do better. And Ethan has shown us how. But Mrs. Caldwell, an executive, interjected. If we introduce a budget line, it could cannibalize premium sales. Then maybe our premium products are overpriced, Margaret said bluntly. Maybe we've been charging what we can, not what we should. Brian's frustration showed. This is more complicated than just deciding to be charitable. We have investors. You're right, Margaret interrupted. Which is why I'm asking you to engage with what Ethan built. His materials reduce cost without compromising strength. His design modifications are based on actual user feedback. This isn't a feel-good project, it's good engineering. She addressed the room. I'm approving this for the next phase. Ethan will work with a full team to refine the design and develop manufacturing specs. In 6 months we'll have a production-ready prototype. Then we'll launch it as the Freedom Series, a Caldwell product designed for accessibility without compromising quality. Not everyone applauded. Brian certainly didn't. But enough people did that something shifted. After the meeting, Margaret caught Ethan's eye and gave him a small nod. He'd won this round, but he knew the real battle was just beginning. 3 months later, Ethan stood backstage at the Denver Convention Center, tugging at the collar of a borrowed suit. Through the curtain he could hear hundreds of voices: journalists, bloggers, disability advocates, insurance representatives. Margaret had made the Freedom Series launch a major event. "We're not just releasing a product," she'd explained. "We're making a statement." The past 3 months had been intense. Lisa Chen had joined his team full-time. Tom Rodriguez worked on manufacturing processes. Even a few other engineers had gotten involved, won over by the mission. Brian, predictably, had opposed everything, questioning results, pointing out flaws, suggesting delays. But now they were here, launch day. 5 minutes, a production assistant called. Ethan's father sat nearby in a pre-production Freedom Series chair. Jack had insisted on being here despite Ethan's concerns. Margaret appeared, looking calm and composed. "Ready." "Terrified," Ethan admitted. "Good. Use it." She smiled. "Remember, you're not selling a product. You're telling a story about why it matters." The lights dimmed, and Ethan heard his cue. He walked onto the stage, momentarily blinded by spotlights. "Good morning," he began. "My name is Ethan Miller, and 2 years ago my father had an accident that left him paralyzed." The crowd leaned forward. "In the months that followed, I learned that disability isn't just a medical condition. It's daily navigation of a world designed for people who can walk, and the equipment that's supposed to help is either incredibly expensive or incredibly inadequate." He stepped from behind the podium. "I'm an engineering student. I've spent my life fixing things. And I started to wonder, why can't we fix this? Why can't we build mobility equipment that's excellent and affordable?" He gestured to the screen showing the Freedom Series. "This is what we built. Not luxury, not budget. Just honest, well-engineered equipment for people who need it." The lights came up on the demonstration area. His father wheeled onto the stage to join him. The audience applauded. "This chair was built for people like my father," Ethan continued. "For veterans who deserve better than government-issued equipment. For seniors on fixed incomes. For anyone who deserves to move freely." Jack demonstrated the chair's features smoothly. Everything was going perfectly. Margaret joined them for the live demonstration. A volunteer veteran, David Martinez, would navigate an obstacle course in a Freedom Series chair. David started up a ramp. The chair moved smoothly. He navigated rough surfaces without difficulty. Approached a doorway. Then Ethan heard it. A grinding sound. David's chair lurched left. There was a sharp crack. The left front wheel buckled inward. Sparks shot from the motor housing. The chair jolted to a stop, tilted dangerously. Everything froze. Then the auditorium erupted. Journalists surged forward. Cameras flashed frantically. People shouted questions. Stage crew rushed to help David. Ethan stood paralyzed, watching his project literally fall apart in front of hundreds of witnesses. Margaret stepped forward to address the crowd, but the damage was done. Journalists were typing on phones. Headlines were already being written. Brian appeared at Ethan's side. "Told you. Cheap materials, amateur engineering." Security began ushering press out, but not before dozens of photos had been taken. Ethan watched it happen, as if underwater. His father wheeled over. "Ethan, I don't understand," Ethan said numbly. "We tested it. The stress analysis showed it could handle twice the load. Sometimes things just fail," Jack said gently. Margaret was speaking with executives, her expression grave. When she looked at Ethan, he saw something new: doubt. By evening, the story was everywhere. The ambitious project that failed. The budget wheelchair that proved you couldn't compromise on quality. The young engineer who'd squandered his chance. Ethan sat at his kitchen table that night, reading the coverage. Each headline felt like a punch. At 3 in the morning, Margaret called. "Don't read the news. Come to the office at 9. We're having a company-wide meeting." "It feels pretty over," Ethan said. "It's not. Trust me." The conference room was packed when Ethan arrived. Margaret, board members, legal counsel, PR representatives, senior engineering team. Brian sat near the back, looking oddly nervous. Before we begin, Margaret said, understand that this meeting is being recorded. What we discuss may become part of legal proceedings. Legal proceedings. Yesterday we suffered a catastrophic failure during our launch, Margaret continued. I want to understand exactly what happened. She turned to Ethan. Walk us through the testing process. Ethan explained the stress tests, the X-rays, the certifications. Unit 3 passed all testing successfully 2 weeks ago and had been used in 4 demonstrations since then. Margaret nodded, then turned to Lisa. Lisa, you examined the failed unit. What did you find? Lisa pulled up close-up images on the display. The failure point was a weld on the left front frame joint, but the failure pattern is unusual. The weld shows signs of deliberate weakening, microscopic scoring that wouldn't be visible to casual inspection but would create a stress concentration point. The room went very quiet. Furthermore, Lisa continued, the motor housing shows evidence of tampering. Someone disconnected a ground wire and reattached it incorrectly, causing the sparking. Neither issue was present during final inspection 3 days ago. Are you saying the wheelchair was sabotaged? A board member asked slowly. The physical evidence is consistent with deliberate interference, Lisa replied carefully. Margaret stood. Last night I asked security to review surveillance footage. I want everyone to see what they found. The screen showed time-stamped footage from 2 days before the launch. The storage room was dimly lit. For a moment nothing happened. Then Brian Fletcher entered the frame. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Brian's face went white. On screen Brian moved to Unit 3, the chair that had failed. He pulled out tools, spent several minutes working on the frame joint, bending close. Then he moved to the motor housing, disconnecting something, making adjustments. The entire process took maybe 10 minutes. When he finished he looked around carefully, then left. The video ended. The silence was absolute. Then everyone started talking at once. Margaret's voice cut through the chaos. Enough. She turned to face Brian directly. Do you have anything to say? Brian's face had gone from white to red. His hands clenched the armrests. For a long moment, Ethan thought he might deny it. Instead Brian stood. You're damn right I did it, and I'd do it again. The room exploded, but Brian kept talking, voice shaking with anger. For 18 years I've given everything to this company. I've designed award-winning products. I've led teams that pushed boundaries. I've made Caldwell Mobility mean excellence and quality. He pointed at Ethan. And then you bring in this kid, this nobody with no credentials, no experience, and you let him tear down everything we've built. You let him convince you we should become a discount brand, that feelings matter more than engineering. Brian, Margaret started, but he cut her off. No, that chair was going to fail eventually anyway. The welds were adequate at best, the materials were cheap. I just accelerated the inevitable. I saved this company from launching a product that would have destroyed our reputation and possibly injured users. He looked around the room, expression almost pleading. Don't you see, I did this for Caldwell, to protect what we've built. The silence that followed was heavy. Get out, Margaret said quietly. Margaret, get out of this building. Now, security will escort you. You have 1 hour to collect your belongings, under supervision. Legal will contact you regarding criminal charges. You're fired, Brian. And you're done in this industry. Security officers appeared. Brian looked around one last time, seeming to realize what he'd done, what he'd lost. Then he walked out, shoulders slumped. After he left, Margaret sat down heavily. She suddenly looked every one of her 73 years. The rest of you are dismissed. Except Ethan. The room emptied slowly. When the door closed, leaving just the two of them, Margaret closed her eyes for a long moment. I'm sorry, Ethan said. I'm sorry my project caused this. Stop. Margaret opened her eyes. Brian's choices are his own. This is not your fault. But if I hadn't pushed so hard, then Brian would still be the person who thinks sabotage is justified to protect his ego. Margaret leaned forward. The press conference was a disaster, but we have evidence now. We can tell the truth. Do you think people will believe us? That depends on how we tell the story. and on whether we have something undeniable to show them. There was a knock. Robert entered. "Mrs. Caldwell, David Martinez is here. He says it's about the wheelchair. Send him in." David wheeled into the room. He looked tired but determined. "Mr. Martinez," Margaret said, "I'm so sorry about what happened." "I'm fine, ma'am." "Embarrassed, but fine." He looked at Ethan. "I wanted you both to know, I don't blame you, and I don't believe that chair was faulty." "What makes you say that?" Ethan asked. "I've been using wheelchairs for 6 years. I know what a regular failure feels like. What happened yesterday wasn't normal. The chair didn't gradually fail, it suddenly broke, like something gave way all at once." David's expression was serious. "Someone did that on purpose. And I want to help you prove it." Margaret smiled for the first time since the disaster. "Mr. Martinez, I think we can arrange that." She turned to Ethan. "How long to prepare another demonstration?" "A few days to set up proper protocols, maybe a week." "You have 3 days. We're holding a press conference Friday. We're going to show the sabotage footage, explain what happened, and demonstrate what the Freedom Series actually does." She looked at David. "If you're willing, I'm in," David said without hesitation. After David left, Margaret said, "There's one more thing. We need your father." Ethan's heart clenched. "Dad, why?" "Because he's been using a Freedom Series prototype for 3 months. Every day in real-world conditions. If Jack Miller stands up and says this chair works, people will listen. Not because of engineering specs, but because it's real. I don't want to put him in that position." "Ask him," Margaret said gently. "Let him choose." That evening Ethan explained everything to his father. The sabotage, the video, the plan for a second press conference. Jack listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're worried about me," Jack said finally. "Worried I can't handle it." "I'm worried about putting you in a position where, son, I've been using your chair for 3 months. You know how many times it's failed." "0. Not once. This chair is the best equipment I've had since the accident. It's lighter, more comfortable, easier to use, and it cost a fraction of what insurance paid for the last one." Jack wheeled closer. "I'm your father. I've watched you work yourself to exhaustion on this project. You think I'm going to let some jealous engineer destroy that without fighting back?" "Dad, I'll do it," Jack said firmly. "I'll testify, demonstrate, answer questions, whatever you need. Because that chair that failed, that wasn't your chair, that was sabotage. And the real Freedom Series deserves a chance." The next 3 days were a blur. Lisa and Tom ran exhaustive tests on remaining units, documenting everything. Legal drafted statements, PR coordinated with media. Friday morning arrived. The press conference was at Caldwell headquarters, in a smaller auditorium. More intimate. News vans lined the street. The story had taken on new life, not just about product failure, but about corporate integrity and ethics. Margaret opened the conference. 3 days ago, Caldwell Mobility experienced a catastrophic failure during a launch. The footage went viral. The headlines were brutal, and they were deserved. She paused. "We failed, but not because we cut corners. We failed because someone within our company deliberately sabotaged the demonstration." The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Margaret raised a hand. "I know this sounds like an excuse, so I'm going to show you exactly what happened." She played the security footage. The entire thing, unedited. Brian entering, working on the chair, leaving. Then a second video, Brian's admission from the internal meeting. The room was silent now. "Brian Fletcher has been terminated. He's facing criminal charges." Margaret gestured to the stage, but the real question remains, was the Freedom Series actually flawed? To answer that, I want to show you what it really does. Not in a choreographed demonstration, but with real people using these chairs in real life. David Martinez wheeled onto stage, followed by Jack Miller. Both used Freedom Series chairs. "This is David Martinez," Margaret said. "He was using the sabotage chair when it failed." "David, tell them why you're here." David spoke clearly. "I'm here because that chair wasn't broken, it was sabotaged. I know the difference. I've been using wheelchairs long enough to understand how they fail naturally versus how they fail when someone makes them fail. He demonstrated his chair, navigating obstacles, showing smooth operation, explaining features. Then Jack spoke. My name is Jack Miller. I'm Ethan's father. 2 years ago, I was paralyzed. Since then I've used 3 different wheelchairs. The first fell apart in 6 months. The second cost $8,000 with insurance, and it's uncomfortable and constantly needs repairs. He gestured to his chair. I've been using this one for 3 months. Every single day. Grocery stores, doctor's appointments, physical therapy, in snow and rain. You want to know if the design is sound, if the materials hold up. He looked directly at the cameras. My son built this chair, and I trust him with my life. This chair has given me more independence and dignity than anything before, and it costs less than 1/3 of what insurance paid for my last one. Jack demonstrated, up ramps, over rough surfaces, through tight spaces, confident, practiced. This wasn't a demo. This was Jack living his life. Journalists took notes frantically. Some were wiping their eyes. Then Margaret did something unexpected. She sat in a Freedom Series chair herself. I'm 73. I use an electric wheelchair due to arthritis. For the past week, I've been using a Freedom Series instead of my usual $40,000 model. Ask me if this design is sound. I've lived with it. She demonstrated, talking about comfort, reliability, features that made daily life easier. We made a mistake, Margaret said, not in designing the Freedom Series, but in not protecting it from someone who saw it as a threat. We've learned. We're moving forward with the launch next month. $1,800 retail. For every chair sold, we donate one to a veteran or low-income user. Because mobility shouldn't be a luxury, it should be a right. The applause started slowly, then built. Journalists stood. A standing ovation spread through the crowd. After the press conference, after interviews and cameras stopped, Ethan found himself alone with Margaret. You did it, she said quietly. We did it, Ethan corrected. Margaret handed him an envelope. Full-time position as Director of User-Centered Design, starting after graduation. We're creating a new department, focused on accessibility. I want you to lead it. Ethan opened it, saw the salary. More money than he'd imagined. I don't know what to say. Say yes, then get back to work. The Freedom Series is just the beginning. Ethan looked out at the empty auditorium. Yes, absolutely yes. 3 weeks after the second press conference, Ethan walked into Caldwell Mobility to find a banner, Freedom Series, 5,000 pre-orders in 48 hours. The response had been overwhelming. The story of sabotage and redemption captured attention in ways a simple launch never could. News outlets featured accessibility stories. The Freedom Series became a symbol. Orders poured in from individuals, Virginia hospitals, nursing homes. Disability advocates praised the design and price. Insurance companies began coverage discussions. Production worked overtime. Lisa was promoted to senior engineer. Tom trained new technicians. The department Margaret promised, user-centered design, was becoming reality. But the moment that mattered most came on a Saturday in spring. Ethan drove to Denver VA Hospital with Margaret for a donation ceremony. The first 50 Freedom Series chairs given to disabled veterans. One by one, veterans received chairs. A young woman who'd lost her legs in Iraq. An older man with spinal injuries from Vietnam. Each one tested their chair and smiled, real genuine smiles, about finally having equipment that worked. One veteran, a man in his 50s, wheeled over to Ethan. You're the designer, right? One of them, Ethan said. It was a team effort. Don't be modest. Thank you. This chair, it's not fancy, not high-tech, but it's mine. It fits me, and it's the first equipment I've gotten from the VA that feels like it was made for a person instead of a patient. After the ceremony, Ethan found his father talking with veterans, sharing experiences. Jack wheeled over. You see that? Jack gestured to the group. That's what you built. Not just chairs. Community. People who understand each other because they have equipment that doesn't fail them. It feels surreal, Ethan admitted. It's not luck. You worked for this. You believed when everyone said it was impossible. You didn't give up when it fell apart. Jack paused. Your mother would have been so proud. The words hit harder than expected. I wish she could have seen it. She did, Jack replied. She saw it in you when you were 16 with a toolkit she gave you. She saw the person you'd become. That evening, Ethan found a package from Margaret with a note. You told me once that you'd spent years fixing broken things. But what needed fixing wasn't just machines. It was how we see each other. You fixed that. Thank you. Margaret inside was a framed patent document. The official patent for the Freedom Series design, with Ethan's name as primary inventor. He hung it beside the toolkit his mother had given him years ago. Two objects, separated by years but connected by the same principle. If something is broken, you figure out how to fix it. Ethan graduated from Colorado Tech in May, walking across the stage with his father in the audience, sitting in a Freedom Series chair, beaming. Margaret attended too, applauding when Ethan's name was called. After graduation, Ethan moved into his new role full-time. The user-centered design department grew to 4 staff. They began working on pediatric adaptations, improved electric designs, prosthetic interfaces, prioritizing comfort over aesthetics. One afternoon in June, Margaret called Ethan into her office with several board members and the CFO. The Freedom Series exceeded every projection, the CFO said. First quarter 8,000 units sold, 3,000 donated, lower margin than premium products, but volume compensates, and the brand impact has been extraordinary. He showed charts of positive press, improved perception, rising stock prices. The board has decided, Margaret said, to commit 15% of annual R&D budget to user-centered design. We're also establishing an accessibility foundation with a $10 million endowment. Ethan stared. That's what happens when you prove doing the right thing is also good business, Margaret finished. You changed this company, Ethan. After the meeting, Margaret asked him to stay. I have something else. I'm stepping down as CEO at year's end. Ethan's stomach dropped. What? Why? I'm 73. I've been running this company almost 50 years. It's time. She smiled. But I'm staying as board chair and advisor. I want to work with the foundation, develop accessibility initiatives, mentor the next generation. Who's taking over? Someone who understands both business and mission. Margaret's smile widened. But that's not why I told you. I told you because what you started, this focus on empathy, on user needs, that's not going away. It's part of the company's DNA now. You made it permanent. As Ethan walked back to his office, he thought about the night in the snow, how that single act had cascaded into all this. He passed the materials lab where Lisa worked on pediatric modifications, the testing facility where Tom trained new employees. Engineers who 6 months ago wouldn't speak to him now asked his opinion. His phone buzzed. His father, dinner at 7. I'm cooking. Your chair works great in the kitchen. Ethan smiled and confirmed. Everything had changed. Yet in ways that mattered most, everything was the same. He was still the kid who fixed things. Still the son caring for his father. Still the person who believed compassion and competence weren't opposites, but partners. The only difference was that now, he had the platform to prove it. 1 year after the Freedom Series launch, Ethan stood on the balcony of Caldwell's executive floor, looking out over Denver. The city stretched before him in golden afternoon light. Below, people moved through their lives. From this height, he couldn't tell who used wheelchairs, who struggled with mobility, but he knew they were there. Letters arrived daily, emails, social media messages, people sharing how the Freedom Series changed their lives, veterans taking grandchildren to parks, seniors regaining independence, young people starting first jobs. 25,000 chairs shipped in the past year, 8,000 donated. The numbers were staggering. But what struck Ethan were individual stories, like Emma, 7 years old with cerebral palsy, who drew him a picture of herself in her purple Freedom Series chair, surrounded by flowers, or Robert, a construction worker who'd lost his legs and sent video of himself back at work using a modified chair. Each story reminded him why this mattered. There you are. Margaret's voice came from behind. She stepped onto the balcony, moving slowly. Her health had declined slightly. Arthritis more aggressive, energy not quite what it was, but her mind was sharp, commitment unwavering. Just thinking, Ethan said. About about how strange it is that a broken wheelchair in a snowstorm led to all this. Margaret smiled. It wasn't the wheelchair, it was you. The wheelchair just gave you opportunity to show who you already were. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city. The board meeting is in an hour, Margaret said. They'll want an update on the pediatric line. It's ready. Lisa's done incredible work. We're on track for spring launch. And international expansion, negotiations ongoing with manufacturers in 3 countries. Regional production to keep costs low while meeting local needs. Ethan paused. It's bigger than I imagined. Good, it should be, because the need is big. Margaret turned to face him. I wanted to talk before the meeting, about the future. Something in her tone made Ethan's stomach tighten. What about it? My health isn't what it was. Doctors say slow down, reduce stress. They're right, I can feel it. She held up a hand. I'm not giving up, not disappearing, but I am stepping back further. Focus on foundation work, mentoring the parts that feed my soul. What does that mean? It means the new CEO will have more autonomy. It also means I want certain things protected. User-centered design, the donation program, the commitment to accessibility over pure profit. The board supports all that, Ethan said. For now. But boards change. CEOs change. What seems obviously right can become negotiable. Margaret's expression grew serious. I want your promise, Ethan, that you'll protect this mission, that you won't let it get diluted or compromised. I promise, Ethan said without hesitation. This isn't just a job, it's personal. It will always be personal. Margaret nodded, satisfied. Good, then I can let go knowing it's in the right hands. The board meeting went smoothly. Ethan presented pediatric development, answered questions, discussed international strategy. He'd gotten comfortable in these settings, learned to speak business language without losing sight of mission. After he stopped by his father's new apartment, larger, more accessible, paid for with modest royalties, Ethan had insisted on setting up. The place had wider doorways, lower counters, a roll-in shower, everything their old apartment hadn't been. Jack was cooking when Ethan arrived, moving easily around the kitchen in his Freedom Series chair. The chair had become an extension of him, so integrated Ethan barely noticed it. How was the board meeting? Jack asked. Productive. They approved pediatric line. International expansion moving forward. Ethan sat at the table, Margaret stepping back further, focusing on the foundation. How do you feel? Scared, grateful, responsible. Ethan watched his father work. Dad, do you ever think about where we were a year ago, 2 years ago, all the time? You working yourself to death, trying to keep us afloat. Me, feeling like a burden. Jack plated food and brought it to the table. And now look, you're changing an industry. I'm cooking in my own apartment. We both have lives we chose instead of just survived. They ate dinner talking about small things, books, design challenges, weekend plans, normal conversation Ethan once thought they'd never have again. As Ethan prepared to leave, Jack said, your mother would have loved this. Not the success or recognition, just seeing you happy, seeing you found something that matters. Ethan hugged his father tightly. We did it together, Dad. All of this only worked because you helped me understand what people actually need. That's what family does, Jack replied simply. Driving home, Ethan thought about the past year, about Brian's sabotage and public failure, about how close he'd come to giving up, about how the darkest moment became the turning point, because the sabotage forced them to prove not just that the chair worked, but why it mattered. It turned a product launch into a story about integrity and refusing to compromise values. Back at his apartment, nicer now, but still modest, still grounded, Ethan sat at his desk and opened his laptop. He had a new proposal for the foundation, adaptive mobility equipment for children in developing countries, designed to be manufactured locally, using available materials. Ambitious, challenging, exactly the work he wanted to spend his life doing. His phone buzzed. A social media notification from @WheelsandDreams. 1 year with my Freedom Series chair. 1 year of independence. 1 year of dignity. Thank you at Ethan Miller and at Caldwell Mobility for remembering disabled people are just people trying to live their lives. The photo showed a young woman in her chair, arms raised triumphantly at the top of a hiking trail, smiling that full, genuine smile of accomplishment, and joy and simple freedom of movement. Ethan saved it to a folder labeled Why We Do This. The folder contained hundreds of similar images, each one a reminder that the work mattered. He returned to his proposal, typing into the night. Outside, city lights flickered. Somewhere out there, people moved through their lives in wheelchairs he'd helped design. People given a chance at independence they couldn't have afforded otherwise. The work continued, and it would continue long after he was gone, because it mattered to people who understood from the inside. Tomorrow Sofia Rodriguez, that freshman engineering student who'd visited his office, would start her internship. Another person with lived experience joining the team. The circle completing itself. Ethan thought about Margaret's question from months ago: what needed fixing? He'd spent years fixing broken things, and in the process, he'd helped fix something more important than equipment. He'd helped fix how people saw each other, how a company thought about purpose, how an industry measured success. Below his window, the city continued its endless motion, and somewhere, in apartments, and houses and schools, people lived their lives a little more freely because of a wheelchair designed by someone who understood what freedom really meant, not the absence of obstacles, but the presence of dignity, independence, and the simple right to move through the world without fighting your equipment every step. Ethan closed his laptop and looked at the patent hanging on his wall beside his mother's toolkit. Two objects connected by the same principle she'd taught him long ago. If something's broken, you don't throw it away, you figure out how to fix it. And sometimes what needs fixing isn't the thing itself, it's how we think about it, how we value it, how we see the person using it. The wheel had turned, and it would keep turning, carrying people forward, one revolution at a time. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of Denver's night beyond the window. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the glow of the city painting faint gold lines across his desk. The patent and the old toolkit still hung side by side, unchanging. But everything else in his life seemed to be moving faster than ever. His phone buzzed. A new email, subject line, Freedom Junior Field Report. He clicked it open. It was from Sofia Rodriguez, the freshman intern who'd joined the user-centered design team 6 months ago, the one who'd come in wide-eyed full of questions, reminding him of himself not that long ago. Hi Ethan, I wanted to let you know the new pediatric prototypes are performing great, mostly. But I noticed something strange in one of the rural field tests. The suspension system works fine on smooth terrain, but on rough dirt roads it vibrates too much for smaller users. The kids say it feels like riding a washing machine. I think we can fix it by redesigning the joint cushions with recycled silicone instead of the synthetic polymer. I'll run simulations tonight. Sofia. Ethan smiled. He could almost hear her excitement in every word. He replied quickly, "Good catch. The real world always finds a way to remind us that design never ends. Let's talk tomorrow morning, and bring your notes. I want you to lead this fix." He hit send and sat back staring at the screen. It made him laugh softly. Freedom Junior. A year ago Freedom Series had been a desperate dream, scribbled in the margins of a notebook. Now a younger engineer was already finding ways to make it better. His gaze drifted to the toolkit again. His mother's name still faintly scratched on the lid, and then to the patent frame beside it. One represented where it began, the other, what it became, and between them was a simple truth: nothing worth building ever truly finishes. There was another email waiting in his inbox, one from Margaret, time-stamped just 5 minutes earlier. He opened it. Subject: a favor Ethan. The foundation received a request from a small rehabilitation center in rural Montana. Their equipment is outdated, and funding was cut last month. They asked if we could send a few Freedom Series chairs. I told them we'd do better. We'll send a team. Can you spare a few days next month? I think the new generation could use a field trip. Ethan chuckled under his breath. Of course she was still working, still planning, still finding new corners of the world to reach. He typed a short reply, "Count me in." Outside, the city lights blurred in the glass like constellations slowly shifting. Somewhere below, he could almost see the faint glint of wheelchair rims catching streetlight, the quiet revolutions of people moving forward, free, independent. He stood, stretched, and walked to the window. In the reflection, his own outline merged with the skyline behind him. One person among millions, connected by the motion of progress, by the stubborn belief that everything broken could be made whole again. On his desk the monitor dimmed, leaving only Sofia's email visible. At the bottom, she'd added one more line he hadn't noticed before. You once said we don't design for perfection, we design for people. I think I finally understand what that means. Ethan smiled, a quiet, knowing kind of smile, because that was the point, wasn't it? To build, to fail, to fix and to pass the tools on, until someone younger, hungrier, kinder took them and carried the work forward. He reached out, ran his fingers along the old steel handle of his mother's toolkit, and whispered the words that had become his life's compass. If something's broken, you figure out how to fix it. Then he turned off the lights, the faint reflection of the city still shimmering in the glass, and somewhere, beneath that endless sky, another story was already beginning, another wheel was already turning.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.